Shalom and welcome to another edition here on the Genesis 49ers page, where we say no to vague interpretations and we follow thorough breakdowns. Today's topic is going to follow up on the last three videos. The Spirit was on me to just keep harping on this fact, keep harping on this topic about Ephraim and their connection to the Gentiles pertaining to salvation in the New Testament. Because we have the documents and we have the literature that we can look over to prove those statements. I brought out Romans and I brought out Paul, clearly drawing a line and, exemplifying that the Gentiles pertain to salvation in the New Testament are actually the 10 tribes, the lost tribes of Israel, if you will. Now, with that being stated, today's video, which might be different than the actual video name, but the presentation is Foolish Ephraim, Samaria, the Lost Tribes. And you're going to see why I went with that name and that title for the presentation. First slide. It says Ken. And we're going to get into why it says that. It says, so when Alexander, this is Alexander the Great being referenced here in Josephus' works. So when Alexander had thus settled matters at Jerusalem, he led his army into the neighboring cities, and when all the inhabitants whom he came received him with great kindness, the Samaritans, who had then Shechem for their metropolis, seeing that Alexander had so greatly honored the Jews, for such the disposition of the Samaritans, as we have already elsewhere declared, that when the Jews are in adversity, they deny that they are kin to them. And that was the practice amongst the Samaritans, the northern kingdom. When the Jews were in trouble, when nations were coming down to attack or invade Judea, and that same nation or tribe tries to go into Samaria, they say, oh no, we're not kin to them. Which will make them what? Another nation or Gentile. They were looking at themselves as Gentiles or other nations. Okay, and we're gonna dive into this even further. It says, and then they processed the truth, but when they received that some good fortune had befallen them, they immediately pretend to have communion with them, saying that they belong to them and derive their genealogy from the posterity of Ephraim and Manasseh. And we know this to be true because later on in the presentation, we know Christ approaches and has a conversation with the woman at the well. Okay, that was from Samaria. And when they said they were Hebrews, but had the name Sidonians living at Shechem, they were going by the name Sidonians. Now, some people say, "Oh, because the Assyrian put Africans into the land." No, he did not put Hamites into the land. He did not put Sidonians in the land, and we're going to cover that as well later on in the presentation. And the sources, Antiquities of the Jews, Book 11, Chapter 8, and 6 is the verse. And we got kin here, one's family and relations. So they basically said they wasn't related to the Jews when they were in adversity, but when they saw, that good could come from being related to them, then they would admit it. Next slide. Medes. It says, when the Samaritans saw the Jews under these sufferings, they no longer confessed that they were of their kindred. Again, when they seen them under sufferings and the other nations, the Greeks at this time, they were like, no, we're not of their stock. We're not those people. Nor did the Temple Mount Gerizim belong to the Almighty God. This was according to their nature, as we have already shown. And they now say that they are a colony of Medes and Persians. So they would say they're Sidonians, Medes, and Persians. Okay, so that's why when you get to the New Testament, they just sum it up and just say Gentiles or Goyim for nations, because they grew up believing this. Okay, this is around what? The second century BC. So we get to the New Testament around the 1st century AD, around Paul and stuff like that. They are dealing with all of these brothers that grew up thinking that they were Persian, Medes, Sidonians, so on and so forth. And these lands, what are Persian and Medes? We're going to deal with the maps later. That's where you get Galatians from, the Corinths and all those other people. Okay, they grew up under this belief because how the Samaritans got down, okay? They denied their kinship with their brothers, the Jews. And that's from the Antiquities of the Jews, book 12, chapter 5, verse 5. Joshua 13:6 I have for a reference here for the brothers that thinking, oh, this is from when the king of Assyria put Africans into the land. These are actually the Africans. No, those weren't African. They get the Sidonian connection, or saying they're Sidonians, because they know the history of the land. The original inhabitants were Canaanites and Sidonians, right? Which Sidon is Canaan's first son. Joshua 13:6 says, all the inhabitants of the hill country from Lebanon unto Misrep-Maim, and all the Sidonians, then will I drive out from before the children of Israel, only divide thou it by lot unto the Israelites for the inheritance, as I have commanded thee. So those were the people that they were claiming to be. Okay. 2 Kings 17, verse 6, in the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria, took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria, and placed them in Halah and in Habor by the river of Gozan, in the city of the Medes. And that's why he said, which they were a colony of. They were a colony of the Medes and Persians, but they were claiming we're a colony of, they were not associating themselves with the Jews and saying that they were Israel. And that's why when you get in the New Testament, you have all these brothers that Paul had to go out and reach that were lost in times past, calling themselves Persian, Medes, and Sidonians. Here are the records. It's in the Antiquity of the Jews by Josephus. Next slide, because there's another farce or myth, if you will, stating that all of the northern kingdom was taken out of the land during the invasion of Shalmaneser, right? That's not true. We have the records in the palace of Korsbed, right? And it reads here about Sargon. It says, I besieged and occupied the town of Samaria. Notice it says the town of Samaria, and took 27,280 of its inhabitants captive. Not all, only 27,000. Okay. I took from them 50 chariots, but left them the rest of their belongings. I placed my lieutenants over them. I renewed the obligation imposed upon them by one of the kings who preceded me, which was Shalmaneser. Shalmaneser was the one who initiated this, but Sargon who finished it. Okay. He's the one who finished it. Then a royal inscription of Sargon II of Assyria, 722 to 705 BC is when it's dated. So we can clearly see not all of them left, but what he did was impose that tax on them, and they had to, basically bow down and be a vassal state to Assyria. Not all of them left. Understand that. So when you get to the New Testament, Samaria is still being inhabited by Israelites. And that's what we were reading earlier. They would call themselves a colony of Medes, Persians, and Sidonians. That's why Paul had to remind them that they were the Israelites. Next slide. Now let's talk about the annexing of the northern kingdom, because after they were captured, by Sargon and the Assyrian regime and dispersed into different countries, and the ones that left behind had to, follow basically the laws and commandments of Assyria and be under their rule and be a vassal state. They were being annexed by many of kings before Josiah. Okay, and I'll cover that in one of my prior videos. You should check it out, that not all of the northern kingdom left on Genesis 49ers. It says, according to 2 Chronicles 34, King Josiah annexed the northern kingdom and collected money from them. Circa 631 BC. Wait a minute. They got captured 722 BC, 720, around that area. How are there still people, if we're going by the narrative, that all of the Israelites left of the northern kingdom? How? This is almost 100 years after that event. So about 100 years after the deportation of 27,000 Israelites from Samaria. That's why we have to do deeper study, deeper researches, and have a differences of readings. We can't just go off of one ideology or one regard of a scripture. We have to have a multitude of readings so we can understand and paint a more vivid picture to the laity and to the people that are looking to be fed. We're here to feed them. We're not learning for ourselves. We learn to feed the laity and the people and rise them up. As polyhistorians, it's our job. 2 Chronicles 34, verse 5 through 7. It says, and he burnt the bones of the priests upon the altars and cleansed Judah and Jerusalem. And this is talking about King Josiah. And so did he in the cities of Manasseh and Ephraim and Simeon and unto Naphtali with their monarchs round about. So he went to these cities of the northern kingdom. And he went and annexed, burnt the bones and everything, evangelizing them, taking away the idols and everything. Right? Verse 7. And when he had broken down the altars and the groves and had beaten the graven images of power and cut down all the idols throughout all the land of Israel, he returned to Jerusalem. So, according to the scripture, the northern kingdom still existed. And one part I didn't put on here is when he actually collected money from Ephraim and Manasseh, the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. Right? And I'm going to address it at the end of the video, and we're just going to pull it up on the Bible and read it. So the next slide. Christ's conversation with the lady at the well in John, the 4th chapter, reveals that the Samaritans are Israelites. John 4 and verse 12, just to cut to the chase. Art thou greater than our father Jacob? She acknowledged that her father was Jacob. The Samaritan woman acknowledged that she was an Israelite, which gave us the well and drank thereof himself and his children and his cattle, because she knows the history of Shechem and the well that was given to Joseph. She understands the history in Genesis because she knows she descends from those people. The Samaritans were Israelites. They just denied their kinship, like we read earlier, and the Josephus, the antiquities of the Jews, with Judah when times got hard for the Jews. That's why they had to be brought back into the fold. That's why Christ said, I have a fold that's not of this fold. He was referring to those lost Israelites that were living in Galatia, Corinth, Pontus, Laodicea, and those places like that, which were formerly Median and Persian territories. Next slide. The 10 tribes are beyond the Euphrates till now and are an immense multitude and not to be estimated in numbers. Antiquities of the Jews, book 11, verse 5. No, book 11, chapter 5, verse 2. And to the right, I have a map, and you can see the Euphrates is here. So they lived above in these areas. These areas here. They were spread about in the Median Persian areas. Now, this is modern day Turkey and Iran. You got Syria here in modern day. But at this time, and especially the time of Christ and Paul, this was Galatia, Pontus, places like that, and Ephesus and everything was the old Median Persian Empire territory. And this is where the Israelites were located. That's why Paul was going to these places, to wake up the lost sheep. Next slide. The 10 tribes to this day inhabit the cities and the mountains of the Medes. And that's by St. Jerome, a quotation from St. Jerome. And again, we have a Galatia, Cilicia, Asia, all these places, Thyatira, Pergamum, Smyrna, Ephesus, all these places mentioned in the Bible, Philadelphia, where Paul was sending letters to, and his mission was, the mission for the lost sheep. They're mentioned for a reason, because this is where the Israelites were scattered. This is where they were. James 1:1. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, greeting. That's the point of the New Testament, to bring all the 12 tribes back into the fold. Even the ones that were foolish. That's why the scriptures say, I will draw you to jealousy from a foolish nation, because Ephraim was foolish. Those that dwell in Shechem, they were foolish, because they called themselves Sidonians. They disconnected themselves from the Jews. Even they were annexed by Josiah. They were annexed under the Maccabees, and they still distanced themselves from their brothers, and vice versa as well. But they lost their heritage by doing it. They lost their heritage. So I want to cover what I read earlier about Josiah, and I also want to cover the brothers that were placed, or the people, let me put it like that, the people that was placed in the land of Israel. So first I'm going to go to 2 Kings 17 and 24, and we're going to deal with that. Matter of fact, we're going to get the blue letter because most people say, oh, those were Africans that was put in that land. Those were Hamites. He put Hamites in the land of Samaria. So when you get to New Testament, that's a Hamite. Nah. First of all, let's clarify one thing. Those people that are mentioned being placed by the Assyrians within Samaria, which is the capital of Israel, right? The northern kingdom. Those people are not Hamites. Maybe one, maybe one or two, but not all of them are Hamites. So we're gonna deal with that, and we're gonna be objective, right? So you're gonna see it. Oh, you already see it on your screen. This is 2 Kings 17:24. It says, and the kings of Assyria brought men from Babylon and from Cutha and from Ava and from Hamath and from Sepharvaim and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel, and they possessed Samaria and dwelt in the cities thereof. Now, we're going to deal with these people, right? We're going to deal with who these people were, and let's see if they're Ham. Let's see if they're Ham. So as you can see the screen, let's create a new source so you guys can see the screen. And we're going to examine these names to see if they are now men from Babylon. Those are Cushites, so yeah, those are Africans, but they're not Sidonians. They're Cushites. They're Hamites, not Africans. Because again, I covered that Africans come from the Afri people, which is Ephraim, which is a Shemitic people. Kuf. Let's deal with Kuf. Let's deal with them. Kut, right? Kut equal crushing. A place from which King Sargon of Assyria imported colonists into Israel, probably a location approximately 20 miles northeast of Babylon. So we don't know what these people are. They could be Shemitic, being placed in the land. We don't know who these people are. So, Eva. Let's deal with Eva, H5755. Eva or Ava, meaning ruin, a city conquered by the Assyrians. And they were brought to Samaria. We don't know if they're Hamites or not. Some compare it with Avata, a city of Phoenicia. It doesn't prove they're Hamites. So these people are not necessarily Ham. And none of them are Sidonia. None of them are Sidon. Sidon. H2574. It says Hamath, a fortress, the principal city of Upper Syria in the valley of Orontes. So these are Syrians. He brought Syrians into the cities, not just what you would call Africans or Hamites. Okay, and Ephraim, H5617, the two Sipparas, a city in Syria conquered by the king of Assyria. So more Syrians. These could possibly be Aramites, the children of Aram, where we get the Syriac or Aramaic language from. So why would they again? They would go by the Sidonian name because that's who the original inhabitants were, not because the king of Assyria placed these other nations there, because they're not only Hamites, and none of them subscribe to being Sidonians, and none of them we can identify as Sidonians. And they wasn't all Hamites. All right, so we just showed and proved that. But now I want to get the rest of the words of the Chronicle of Josiah. So we're going to go to 2 Chronicles again. And we want 2 Chronicles 34 to bring out the rest of that history. Because the topic is about the foolish nation of Ephraim, the Samaritans, and how they deny their kinship. And we're going to show that these Samaritans were Israelites even 100 years after the placing of these people in Samaria, the capital of Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel, right? you still have Israelites there. So let's go to 5, and we'll just start off at 5. It says, and he burnt the bones of the priests upon the altars and cleansed Judah and Jerusalem. And so did he in the cities of Manasseh and Ephraim and Simeon, even unto Naphtali, with their mattocks round about. And when he had broken down the altars and the groves, and had beaten the graven images of the pilot, and cut down all the idols throughout all the land of Israel, he returned to Jerusalem. Now in the 18th year of his reign, when he had purged the land in the house, he sent Shaphan the son of Azaliah and Maaseiah the governor of the city, and Joel and the son of Joahaz the recorder, to repair the house of the Lord his God. And when they came to Hilkiah the high priest, they delivered the money that was brought into the house of God, which the Levites that kept the doors had gathered of the hand of Manasseh and Ephraim, and all the remnant of Israel and of Judah and Benjamin, and they returned to Jerusalem. Again, this happened around 631 BC, 100 years, almost 100 years after the deportation of Israel and the placement of other nations within that land. So with that being stated, the Bible tells you that the northern kingdom did not all got deported from that land. They still had some, okay, in the capital Samaria, that would call themselves Samaritans, that followed the narrative that we read in Josephus, that they were denying their kinship with their brothers. Okay? They denied that kinship. And with that being stated, that's why when you get to the New Testament, you have these people that are being referred to as Gentiles that are Israelites. Just their history and them denying their kinship and following pagan deities and becoming colonies of these lands that they were in and being joined to these citizens, they lost that and they had to be retaught and brought back into the fold. That's the whole mission of the New Testament. Okay? That's the mission, to bring back the lost sheep of Israel, to connect them with Judea again, and bring back the whole house holy and repair the breaches of the house of David. Okay? So I covered that in my other 3 videos. This is possibly going to be my last video touching on this topic. I'm going to make a video about the Scythians and how they connect to the northern kingdom as well. Stay tuned, brothers. I pray that this was edifying. I pray that you got something out of it. Take notes, like, share on the social media platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and spread the word about Genesis 49ers. We say no to vague interpretations, and we follow thorough breakdowns. Y'all know the slogan. So with that, I'm going to say shalom. Genesis 49ers signing off.